Let's move on to the subject of Ukraine. And of course, for the war in Ukraine, money is no problem. Unlimited billions, whether it's dollars or UK pounds. But something is going wrong. Let's have a look at some of the reporting that we've seen over the last year. I've chosen The Guardian here and Simon Disdall. The awful truth is dawning. Putin may win in Ukraine. Now, that was the 24th of April, 22. Let's go on to this one. Putin is already at war with Europe. There is only one way to stop him. That's the 17th of July, 22. And if we come on to this, this part of that particular article, the obvious escape route is a land for peace deal with Putin agreed over Ukraine's dead bodies. This kind of shoddy sellout has influential advocates. If Russia is returned to business as normal, it would alleviate Europe's suffering, though probably not Ukraine. So the callousness in this article, the Ukraine dead bodies don't matter at all. If we try and stop the dead bodies accumulating, that's some sort of shoddy deal. But he goes on, let's do a bit more. Yet such a deal would be a precedent-setting disaster for future peace and security across the continent and globally too. Just think Taiwan or Estonia. It would destroy the sovereign integrity of democratic Ukraine. Fortunately, he says there is an alternative, using NATO's overwhelming power to decisively turn the military tide. Now, remember, this was back in the summer last year. This man wants NATO to go to war with Russia. Utterly incredible. And we'll do a bit more. This is August 22. Putin's apparently trapped and desperate. Will his friends in the West rescue him? These are all headline and major parts of articles that I'm putting up on the screen. Let's bring this one up. Defeat for Ukraine would be a global disaster. NATO must finally step in to stop Russia. So just remarkable. This man seems to be utterly confused in what's happening. 1 minute it's all going well, then it's better than well. Russia is clearly failing and going to lose. Then, oh dear, Russia is going to win. Why is he so confused? I'm going to suggest that he's so confused in his own logic because he believes the propaganda that the US, UK, NATO and EU and the Western media are what he's part of putting out. And let's emphasise this, and we'll go to the Twitter part of the UK's Ministry of Defence. Here's their battlefield situation for the 10th of July. And what do we see on it? Well, basically, there's a bit of deception going on here, because if you have a look at those hashed areas, the contested areas, and you have a look at the scale of the map, it leads you to believe that the Ukrainians have taken back significant amounts of ground, penetrations of up to 12 miles, this would be, into the Russian lines. But you've got to look at the diagram a little bit more closely, because the small print, which is top right on your screen at the moment, it says this: warning, control and contested areas are for illustrative purposes only and should not be taken as being to scale. So they had to put that warning up, otherwise the deceit would become completely obvious. But to most people, what's going on here is, for the quick reader, they will pick up from the image that Ukraine is doing well when the opposite is true. And we've also got the lockdown on social media channels that are trying to report what's going on. Now, we've mentioned this site before. There's some aspects of the reporting which are good, some which I don't like so much. But the key point is that these reports appear to be targeted at the moment. So this account is temporarily restricted. But we need social media. Military Summary is one of the better channels, in my opinion. Here they're showing that the Russians have retaken the island areas at the Dnipro Delta. So this is Kherson part of the battlefield. The islands have dried out and the Russians have moved back in. On the Zaporizhia front, small repetitive Ukrainian armor and troop attacks repulsed with heavy Ukrainian casualties. This, of course, not being reported by the BBC, the West and the US at all. Here's the Avdiivka front, very heavy repetitive Ukrainian army and troop attacks, which have been repulsed again with heavy Ukrainian casualties. But the Russians have changed their tactics, and they're now following up with counterattacks, which are increasing the Ukrainian casualties. What are those casualties? Well, of course, we don't know. This is another Guardian article here, Russia-Ukraine war at a glance, what we know on day 502 of the invasion. But if you read the sub-headline here, it says an investigation suggests Russia has lost 47,000 troops in Ukraine so far. That's killed. But of course, this report has come from the Ukrainian authorities themselves. And the Guardian, along with the BBC and other Western media, doesn't want to report what the true horrors of the Ukrainian casualties are. We will just today ask the question, why not? And we'll leave the audience to think about that. But this is something else coming in. I'm going to talk about cluster bombs in a separate section. But here's the Guardian. End apparently justifies the means for Biden in sending cluster bombs to Ukraine. But if we have a look at a quote within this article, we get a key bit of information. The paragraph is and this is the president talking about cluster bombs, was a very difficult decision on my part. And by the way, I discussed this with our allies. I discussed this with our friends up on Capitol Hill. The Ukrainians are running out of ammunition. So the reason that the cluster bombs have got to go in, or the shells in this case, are that the West, including the US, have run out of ammunition, and the Russians consistently outgunning the Ukrainians. So some truth there in the Guardian report, but you've got to look for the detail. Well, if you like what the UK column is doing, please join our community. That would be wonderful. You can also help us by buying something from the UK column shop. Lots of good items. More interesting things will be coming up in the coming weeks. But also do share our information, because this is a key part of what we're doing, which is to get this information out as far and wide as possible. Now, a quick advert here, because some exciting things happening in Syria. If things are bad for the BBC in UK at the moment, it's got very bad for them in Syria, because the BBC has been kicked out. It says, since the beginning of the terrorist war against Syria, the BBC has deliberately provided from time to time subjective and false information and reports on the Syrian reality. Although the channel was warned more than once, it continued to broadcast its misleading reports based on statements and testimonies from terrorist and anti-Syrian authority. As a result of the channel's failure to adhere to professional standards and its insistence on providing politicized and misleading reports to world opinion, the Ministry of Information decided the following: revoking the accreditation of the channel's correspondent and cameraman in Syria. And that's a repeat there effectively. So basically, they've revoked the accreditation of the BBC and their correspondent in Syria. And we're delighted to say that Vanessa Beeley will be joining us Friday to talk about this incident in detail. But the BBC now blocked from its offices in Syria. Interview coming out tomorrow at 1 p.m, where I interview Kim Isherwood from Public Child Protection Wales. This was a very fiery update on what's been happening and what the child protection team has been trying to do. And we've also got this one, the Senedd Cardiff Bay, which is 11th of July, so tomorrow as well, 12 o'clock. You can actually join the public child protection gathering and meet some of the people, but also show support for them. Right, well, where does that take us?